Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ok Xoomer. I'm your host, Xometry guy, and former Jeopardy champion, Aaron Lichtig, and I'm here today with Ashley Alleyne. Ashley is a 3D printing design entrepreneur in residence. So welcome, Ashley. Thanks for joining Ok Xoomer today.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. I'm so happy to be here virtually.
So first of all, what is a 3D printing design entrepreneur in residence?
Okay, good question, because at first, I didn't know what it was either. So basically, I'm a design entrepreneur in residence at Montclair State University, which is where I went to school and got my 3D printing certificate. So basically what it is, it's basically an artist in residence, where usually a university or a gallery or a museum will have an artist in residence creating work and things like that. But in this case, I'm in the process of starting my own business in 3D printing, which is why I'm a 3D printing design entrepreneur in residence. And basically, I'm in the process of creating my own 3D printed jewelry and home decor line. I have some of my little 3D prints right here. They're really old, but those are just some examples from the past. And I 3D print jewelry, and these are just some examples. Right here is mirrored, so I'm looking at the opposite side, but I'm in the process of creating those things, and that's currently what I'm doing. I use both FDM and SLA. I love both. I love 3D printing, and yeah, that's pretty much what I'm working on right now.
So how did you get your start in 3D printing?
Okay, it's funny because it was a complete accident. I didn't even know how 3D printing worked at all. So basically, I went to Montclair State University. I've been doing photography for probably since I was 12, but I went to Montclair State for photography. I have been published in 15 magazines, including Vogue, Italia. So I was I love this, and I'm just going to get my degree, and I'm going to go. I'm going to graduate. And then senior year, I took this 3D printing class, and it's a part of a class program where you take 3 classes. It's really based on the innovation side of things, and then you learn about 3D printing as well, FDM and SLA. And then at the end, you get to work at a law firm and 3D print patents for people. So I took the first class, and it was cool, because it's yeah, you learn about the innovation, you learn about the beginning of FDM 3D printing, but it was really based on the innovation side. And then, I was 3D printing my own stuff for the class, but at the end of the class, I started 3D printing my own stuff that I designed. And the first thing I ever designed in 3D printed and 3D model was a full-size 3D printed guitar. And I was like, oh my God, I can literally 3D print whatever I want. I have an idea in my head, and I can make it into a 3D object and bring it into my head in one world into the actual 3D world. And that was crazy to me. And so basically, my professors, I basically lived at the 3D printing lab from that point. I was there over winter break. I slept there. The janitor probably at 4 o'clock in the morning was like, why is she still here? Should I call someone? But I just love 3D printing so much. And basically one day my professor saw me working on it, and they saw how hard I was working. And then they were like, you're going to be a lab tech. I was like, no, I'm not. Because I was about to graduate, and I was just like, yeah, I just want to get my degree and go. And but they were like, you're here all the time, you use our materials and things like that, and now it's time for you to give back. I was like, okay, can't argue with that, because I would love to help out in any way I can and give back. And I'm so glad I did, because I learned so much from being a lab tech. I really learned how to fix 3D printers and what to do when they fail. And when you're using a makerspace, 200 people are using 3D printers at a time, so things are bound to happen. So I learned a lot. So in the second class, and it was my last semester of college, I took the second 3D printing class. I was a lab tech, and then that's when I started learning about resin 3D printers, or SLA 3D printers. And I fell in love. There were 5 Formlabs 3D printers. I was like, they're basically my children now, because I love them so much. And so that was hooked on it. And I was just like, okay, I really want to do 3D printing. But then I graduated, so I was like, I don't know what to do now. So then I worked as a 3D printing design consultant, where I was basically freelance working on a couple of projects. One was for a scientist. The other one was basically making a 3D model and 3D printing out of basically a render of an actual building without a 3D scanner. And so that was fun. At first it was a little tricky, but that really helped me learn how to 3D model accurately. And then I found out, my friend told me that I was the only person who was allowed to work as a design consultant without having the full certificate, because my professors saw that I literally lived there and I worked so hard and they really believed in me. And then I was the only person who was allowed to do that without the certificate. And so basically at the end of the summer, I was like, well, I don't know what to do now. You know, I love photography. I love 3D printing now. Like, what do I do? So then I decided to go back to school to finish my 3D printing certificate in innovation. I got the certificate and now I work at Tapestry, which is the parent company of Coach Spade and Stuart Weitzman, as their 3D printing assistant. And then now I'm a 3D printing design entrepreneur resident at Montclair St, which is where I went to school. So in 2 years, I went from a student to a lab tech to a design consultant to a graduate, and then to a 3D printing design entrepreneur resident in 2 years. So with hard work, if you're passionate and you love 3D printing, anything's possible. I love 3D printing. I'm glad we're probably going to get cut off out of time because I will not stop talking about 3D printing.
That is an amazing story, and I think it shows how 3D printing this space is one where you can move fast, right? Because if you can build that expertise, it's not an area of expertise that a lot of people have. So where are you going with your business? Where do you see this going over the next year or two?
Okay, good question. So basically, it's been interesting because, before the pandemic, I lived there basically. I'm not a student anymore. I still basically live there. And, I would always prototype on FDM 3D printer, then go to SLA 3D printer, and then have the final product. But it's been difficult to get there because of the pandemic, because where I live, you need a car to get there. And so what I've been doing in the meantime is that I've been actually learning how to 3D render really well, to the point where things look really realistic. So I've been prototyping in 3D, doing all my iterations that way. And then, so now I have all the files and everything ready to go. So once I go back to the lab, it's going to be like, bam, 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 just print everything out. I should be good to go from there. And I hope I'm going to be doing the jewelry part first and then releasing the home decor line. And that's really want to start first. And I also plan on making a whole YouTube channel, all these things to go along with it. So I just want to experiment. I just want to go crazy and just build from there.
Awesome. Now, going back to your prior experience, why did you decide to 3D print a full guitar as the first thing that you tried to do?
Because I'm crazy. Basically, it's funny because I just really believed in myself. And I know that sounds really cliche, because when I first started 3D printing, I feel like I had imposter syndrome, because I had a lot of friends who are still my friends, who I love very much, who helped me out when I started 3D printing. But at first when I did, because in my head, I'm just like, I'm a photographer, I don't have a design background, or I'm not an engineer. I'm like, I don't know if I could do this. But then after just experimenting and learning things, I've realized like anyone can 3D print, and it's totally okay if you don't have experience in X, Y, and Z. So I've always been like into rock music my whole entire life. Like I love rock music, and it's I'm really passionate about. And I was like, well, when I started 3D printing my own stuff, I was like, well, why don't I just do what I'm really passionate about and see what happens from here? And I'm really glad I started off with a full-size 3D printed guitar, because I love guitar so much. Like my children are in the other room, my 5 guitars. And basically, I really wanted to challenge myself, because if I really wanted to see what I can do and what 3D printing can do, but also do something I love at the same time, so it'll keep my interest and keep me going. And basically, I really learned how to iterate straight off the bat, because it was not something that just came off the printer. It was like, oh, thank you so much. But it was just like, it was like months and like sometimes tears. But I learned a couple things. One, the first thing I learned was like to do things over. And when I first did it the first time, I was using a program that, was good, but, couldn't do what I really wanted to do. And one day my professor, Ian, was like, just start over. I'm like, start over? What do you mean start over? I just worked so hard on this. It was like, start over. And I fixed the problem within 5 minutes and I reprinted it and it was fine. So I just really believed in myself, and I knew, like, if you're really passionate about something, like, just go for it. And then because of my passion for music, it got me into 3D printing, and I don't know if I didn't 3D print the guitar, if I would be doing 3D printing right now.
Nice. Now, you mentioned learning how to design and learning how to do rendering. What kind of software do you use for those things?
So when I was in school, and what I would really recommend starting off with was Fusion 360. I love Fusion 360. Like,
And
it's my best friend.
yeah, Xometry just last week, we released our Fusion 360 app.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so you can get instant pricing and lead times directly within the Fusion 360 workspace.
There you go. Yeah, so, and then the great thing about Fusion 360, I don't know if they still do this, but I'm pretty sure if you're a student, you get a really long trial. I found that out because mine just ended, but if you're a student and you use your student email, I think you do get some kind of student trial. It might be 1 year or 3 years, I'm not sure, but that's the great thing about it. And then it's easier to use than the program I'm using now, in a sense. I feel like Fusion 360 is more user-friendly, especially when you're starting out. So I love Fusion 360. Fusion 360 has a special place in my heart. But then now I use Rhino as well to do my 3D modeling. So I still use Fusion. I still use Rhino. I use Rhino. I also use Mesh Mixer a lot. I love Mesh Mixer. And I have been doing rendering in Keyshot, and I'm self-taught with that. So I'm still learning more things day by day, but I just love playing around with things. And it's funny because before I moved, when I was in my house, my mom came downstairs like, wow, that's a nice photograph. And I was like, no, that's not a photograph. It's like a 3D render. She's like, what? Like, so yeah, it's like, I just love Keyshot because it's basically photography. Everything I learned in a photography studio, like, it's in Keyshot, it's just 3D. So it's interesting.
Cool. Any other advice you would have for somebody who's just getting into 3D printing and wants to learn and grow in the industry?
Yeah, so definitely, especially if you're into like fashion jewelry. So Liz Hill, I talk about her all the time. So she was my manager actually at Tapestry. She was the one who hired me, and she now works at Formlabs. Liz has great videos on Tinkercad. For when you're just starting out and learning 3D modeling, I highly recommend Tinkercad because it's really user-friendly. I feel like it's anyone of any age could learn how to use Tinkercad. I feel like it's one of the more user-friendly programs. Then I would say maybe go to something like SolidWorks or Fusion 360. Once you have that foundation down, you can try one of those programs. I think they both have student trials. I'm not 100% sure. And then I would go to Rhino or Blender or something like that, one of those programs. And then, then Keyshot or any other program you want to use. I definitely think the important thing is just know your use case for what you want to make. So a program is like not one size fits all, but basically just know your end use case of what you want to make, because one application might be better at this than that. So just keep in mind your end use case. But when you're just starting out, I would recommend starting with Tinkercad, then going for something like Fusion 360 / SolidWorks, and then Rhino, and then, rendering. But SolidWorks and Fusion 360, I think probably all of them do have rendering capabilities in them too. So that's also great.
Sounds good. That's great advice. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for joining Ok Xoomer today. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And thanks for watching, everybody. We will be back with another episode of Ok Xoomer next week. We'll see you then.